I think what I liked about manufacturing is the intellectual challenge, is the opportunity to learn, is the opportunity to problem solve, figure out how to do things better. Altec has a big culture of continuous improvement. We're constantly trying to figure out how to take waste out of the process, how to lean out the operation, and how to put more value into what we do for our customers.
A quick interruption to remind you to like, subscribe, and rate this podcast so we can get your feedback and know how to make it better. Hey, it's Ari Santiago. Welcome to another episode of the Made in America podcast. Really excited to have a friend on today, Vice President and Troublemaker at Altek Electronics, Sabrina Beck. Sabrina, thank you so much for coming on today.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks
Sabrina,
for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you on, and it's the Made in America podcast. So we always start off with the same two questions. What do you make, and why do you make it?
So Altek Electronics assembles printed circuit boards, chassis, and control panels used in high-cost capital equipment such as medical diagnostic equipment like mammography machines, elevators, fan controls used in telecommunications towers, gas detection systems used for homeland security, and cutters for the garment industry, among many other products.
Wow, that's a pretty wide range of like really important things for anybody who's really cares about breast health, who cares about telecommunications and defense. Lots of great stuff.
Yes, we're very proud of the products that we make.
As well, you should be. Why do you make it?
Okay, so we do what we do because back in 1948, a 16-year-old boy received a crystal radio kit from his older brother Sam, who was serving in the Air Force. And that 16-year-old boy is my father, Stephen Altschuler. And that radio kit sparked his interest in electronics. He earned his engineering degree from UConn, and then he earned his master's degree from Yale University. After college, he served in the Air Force for 2 years, working in a computer lab that specialized in radar. And if I told you exactly what he did, I'd have to kill you. So I can't tell you no. After that, he got a job with a company selling laboratory equipment. And his job was to travel across country to demonstrate the equipment to labs in universities and research centers. And so Dad did what any conscientious, reasonable employee would do. He bought an airplane. This man who grew up during the Depression and had to work in the asparagus fields to help support his family, bought an airplane and traveled across the country from state to state demonstrating this lab equipment for his employer. It's one of the most interesting things that I've heard about him.
Where did he learn how to fly?
Well, I guess he learned in the Air Force.
Probably. Although normally operating the radar doesn't get you in the cockpit of an airplane, but interesting.
I think that's a story for another day. I'll
Absolutely.
have to ask for more details about that.
That's really cool.
But after that, his brother Sam recruited him to work in Cambridge with him. So he became a test technician and then worked his way up to engineering manager. And he met my mother. They got married in the early 60s, and they decided they didn't want to live in the hustle and bustle of the big city of Boston. So they moved out to the little farm community of Goshen, Connecticut. And my father got a job as an engineer in Torrington, developing products for that company's customers. And things went along well for a number of years until the oil embargo of 1971. And then the company fell on hard times. And when the bank froze the assets and started to dismantle the company, my father knew that he had to support his wife and kids. So he partnered with his friend Tom Helms. They quickly developed a company. They bought the equipment they needed from the auction and negotiated with the customers to give them cash in advance so they would have operating capital. And Altec was born, a phoenix rising out of the ashes.
Yeah, for sure.
And so my parents had divorced around that time, and about 3 to 5 years later, he married my stepmother, Joan, and he and Joan developed the business and worked hard on the business with Tom until Tom passed. And in the early 90s, my brother, David, who's a few years my junior, came on board, and my stepmother retired. And then 5 years later, I came on board to work with Dad and my brother, David.
Wow, what an amazing story, and so much like Connecticut, right? I mean, we got an undergrad from UConn, graduate degree from Yale. Really fascinating. What got you into manufacturing? I mean, what were you doing before you joined?
That's a
Altec?
great question. So I graduated from Quinnipiac University. At the time, it was Quinnipiac College, and I had a degree in business management and marketing. I went into the insurance industry where I worked for 12 years doing underwriting and marketing. And then one day, Dad asked me to lunch. And he said, I'm doing my estate planning. Do you have any interest at all in coming into the family business? Because it's now or never. I had just earned my CPCU and my other degree, CIC degree, for the insurance industry. I was kind of mid-career. I was kind of set to take off there, and then I had to say, okay, now or never. I had to do it.
You had to do it.
I had to try it. So I came on board and started in estimating and business development, and learned so much. I'm still learning every single day. But it's been quite a journey.
Yeah. I mean, so you joined the company in the early 90s?
1998, actually.
Oh, late 90s.
Late 90s.
Already after having another famous Connecticut career.
Yes, after working in the insurance industry. Yes, I went into manufacturing, and I had to learn from the ground up, because even though Dad brought us to work with him when we were kids, on Saturdays primarily, he was so busy working that he didn't really have time to teach us anything about the electronics industry. So, we did things like we popped the bubble pack in the shipping department, and my dad charged us to nickel every time we wanted to make a copy on the copy machine to teach us the value of $1. And then when we really got in his hair, he would give us a couple bucks and send us down to the Warner Theater to watch a movie and get out of his hair for a few hours. So we grew up in the business, but my brother and I didn't really start learning it until we were in our 20s.
Wow. So what was it like coming into the family business? So the business had already been going on for 26 years, right? But this started in 72, and so 98, so 26 years when you get involved. So you're coming into it, no manufacturing experience, daddy's little girl. I'm sure that's a little bit of an interesting transition.
Yes.
How'd that play out?
Yes. Well, it was very interesting. It was a little bit awkward. It was a little bit of a culture shock, because in the insurance industry, you're dealing with contracts, and in the manufacturing industry, you're dealing with physical objects. And so I really had to learn the differences between the two industries. And then I had to learn how to work with my dad and my brother. What do you do if you make a mistake at work, and it's not just your boss who's a little upset with you, it's your father too, and then you have to face him at the Sunday dinner or what have you. So it definitely was a transition, and I really appreciate the opportunity. It was, a situation where if we had a problem, we had to solve. There was no suite of corporate people who were going to tell you how to solve it. You had to figure it out. And so one day we had this woman who was in charge of the documentation in our company. Everything we did in that company went through her department, and she gave her notice. She wanted to go work for a different company. I never felt so vulnerable in my life, because I knew that nobody else in the company knew how to do exactly what she did. So I went to my father and I said, hey, I'd like to try to do that job. I never want to feel this vulnerable again. If I learn how to do that job, I can develop the department, make sure that we have other people who know how to do what Anita knows how to do. And if anybody calls in sick, or if they decide to leave the company, we'll never be in that situation again. And he let me do it. He let me take over that job, and I kind of learned on the job how to enter bills of material and manage documentation. And I hired a woman, Loretta Hansen, who's still with me today, and she has a really heavy influence on how we do things in the department, and has done a fantastic job all these years.
So I guess you must have liked it, because you've been with it for quite some time, even though it was kind of a big change going from, to your point, dealing with contracts and paper and concepts to something physical, which has really tight tolerances, there's really no margin for error, right? Like if it, like when you're doing a PCB, a printed circuit board, it either works or it doesn't work. It either meets the demands of the job or it doesn't. And sometimes those things aren't as obvious in insurance or in kind of those types of jobs. You seem to transition well to it.
Yeah, and it starts right from the documentation. You know, you can have a part number with 10 digits. If one digit is off, you can have a really big problem, a really expensive problem. So I think what I liked about manufacturing is the intellectual challenge, is the opportunity to learn, is the opportunity to problem solve, figure out how to do things better. Altec has a big culture of continuous improvement. We're constantly trying to figure out how to take waste out of the process, how to lean out the operation, and how to put more value into what we do for our customers. And we actually have a director of continuous improvement. So it's something we focus on every day. And people are going to make mistakes. You're human, but what we try to do is set up the processes to make it hard to do it wrong and easy to do it right.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, what have you done to kind of learn the industry and get more integrated? Obviously, you spend time there every day.
Yep.
But I mean, have you gotten involved in groups outside? Did you do reading? Like, what's helped you kind of get comfortable in the manufacturing space?
That's a great question. So I really wanted to work from the ground up, but Dad was afraid that if he put me into the factory, I would get in the way of what they were doing out there. So he really wasn't comfortable with that idea. So what I started to do is work overtime. So after the work day, if there was a lot of work in the factory, I would stay after hours and then ask the employees there to give me something to do. So I learned how to stuff a board. I learned how to take the components and identify what they were and put them in the right locations, and other things.
Is that what stuffing a board is?
That's what stuffing a board is.
There
you go. The board that I have here on the table, the board in the front is a through-hole board, and that's when you physically pick up the parts and stuff them in the board. And then the one in the back is a surface mount board, and the machine builds that type of board.
Got it.
But whether I was stuffing components or inspecting a board, just being out in the factory and listening to what other people were saying, I really picked up a lot. Also, I got involved in the Surface Mount Technology Association. So I served on the board there. I was the treasurer, the secretary, vice president, president throughout the years.
The Surface Mount Technology Association.
Yes, the SMTA.
Look at that. They got a group for everything. That's
yes,
really cool.
They do.
Yeah.
So through business meetings and some of the educational opportunities they had there, I picked up even more. And then locally, I joined the Smaller Manufacturers Association, or the SMA. And through the SMA, I had the opportunity to learn more business-oriented concepts, things about marketing, IT, lean, whatever the subject matter was at the monthly meeting, I would absorb the things that were being taught.
So you really threw yourself kind of into it at so many different levels. I mean, you're putting in extra time at the office or at the shop to kind of do and get your hands on, to kind of learn what's going on in the product, joining a group, and not just kind of joining it on the side, but I mean, getting super engaged on the board and getting involved in the board at the SMA. Did you find that getting to understand the product and how it's made was critical to, being a vice president? Like how did being able to build a product help you to do your work or get more engaged?
So I'm responsible for interfacing with the customers. I'm in charge of business development, and I have to understand what their needs are, what their pain is, and you can't really do that if you don't know how the product goes together. We're also always looking at opportunities for issues to happen in the manufacturing process. So we want to ask the right questions during the sales process in order to anticipate what could go wrong so that we could fix it before it does. The goal is to ship a printed circuit board that works right out of the box. And so we do a lot of upfront work to iron out any wrinkles that could happen in the process.
And so from that perspective, you're going to be interfacing with the customers and helping them develop, understanding how the things are made and what goes where and what's possible and what's impossible. That's obviously got to be critical. So you got all that information.
So a little bit of what you're talking about is engineering work, and we have a staff of electrical engineers who can get into the nitty-gritty of the circuit board with our customers. I pretty much identify, okay, what is the board involved? Is it through-hole? Is it surface mount? Is it multi-layer? How many do you need? When do you need them? Do you need any kind of special assembly processes? And so what I'm doing is I'm doing a risk analysis, and I'm also trying to determine whether Altec has the right capabilities for this specific customer. I'm also looking for the customer's blind spots so that we can help them overcome any issues that may happen in the manufacturing process. You know, if we see that the connector is hanging over the edge of the board and that's going to cause a problem, or components are too close together, what have you, we try to raise that issue right up front, and so that they can fix it and we can make it more manufacturable and more cost effective to manufacture.
Man, super helpful, like value add, no doubt about that.
Yes, we do.
So, I mean, as you guys have been developing the business, what do you see as some of like the biggest opportunities and the biggest challenges that you guys are facing right now?
Well, I think the biggest opportunities now are that everything pretty much has a printed circuit board. So, you know,
my refrigerator,
Yeah.
Your
TV, your refrigerator, you can talk to your appliances now. And so there's tremendous opportunity. Also, I think through the pandemic and through some other issues that are happening around the world, companies are realizing that they want to manufacture a little bit closer to their customer. So instead of putting everything in China and manufacturing everything in China and then shipping it around the world, they're going to be bringing some of that back to the United States and manufacturing a little bit closer to home. So there are definitely some opportunities for our business. The nearshoring phenomenon is one of them.
Did you see sort of the downside of that around the time that you came on? Because I think there was a big move
question.
to globalization and like the, especially the 90s and the early 2000s. Did you see some of that as a challenge?
So we did lose initially some business with one of our large customers who offshored it. I don't know if they went, I think they went to Mexico. And then we got it back a few years later. We're a family-owned, privately held business, so we're going to make decisions that satisfy the customers, not the shareholders, which means that we hold extra inventory. It means that if we have to put in extra time or extra money to get something right, we're going to do that. And the big tier one multinational companies like Flextronics, they've got to stay on a schedule.
Right.
And it can take 13 weeks to get a delivery. With Altec, it takes us 2 weeks to build something as long as we can get the materials.
Wow, so that you think that nimbleness and ability to kind of be close to the customer, which is sort of classic business 101, right? Mm-hmm. You want to be able to do that ability has really served you well.
Yes, absolutely. Our ability to be flexible and to meet the needs of the customer, put them first, has made us successful. So not only did we get that customer back, but as this business was going offshore, we were able to grow our business. So when my dad started the company, he was under $30 million in revenue, and right before the pandemic, we were up to $35 million in revenue. So we've been able to be successful by working hard at meeting customer needs.
That's great. And it is nice to be in an industry where, to your point, more things have a printed circuit board in it and electronics than they did last year or the year before that. And I have a feeling next year
Yes.
It will be even more. It's like super amazing, right? This chip shortage that we've been talking about, which I actually wanted to ask you about. I don't know how many people know about this like giant chip shortage out there, though they've probably been impacted it one way or the other. But whether it's home appliances, whether it's cars, computers, there's just such a delay in getting things going, in large part, I think, because of the global supply chain, right? That's really been
Yes.
the disruption.
Yes. So more and more things are using these chips, and automobiles, the electric vehicles, and the automobiles with all the electronics in them now is gobbling up all of that inventory. And then I think with the pandemic, the factories had to slow down their production in order to keep everyone safe and mitigate the spread of the virus. So it was a perfect storm for there to be a tremendous chip shortage. And I know that the automakers are shutting down some factories for a period of time because they just can't get the devices that they need.
So does that, since I presume the chips are getting put in things with printed circuit boards, right? Is there like kind of a flow down effect to your customers not being able to accept kind of shipments, or they need to slow down on delivery because they don't have the chips to kind of finish the assembly of whatever the boards are going into?
So we are in the heat of this situation right now. And one of the things that our team can do, because we have engineers on staff, is we can do a quick design of a daughter board. We can design in a different kind of chip. We can help the customer redesign a board if necessary. We've been purchasing design kits instead of just the component and pulling the component off to meet customer needs. Sometimes customers will buy, a piece of equipment just to pull a chip off, depending on if they're going to miss the shipment of $1 million piece of equipment,
It's
they're going
worth it. Yeah.
they're going to do what they have to do to get the material to ship that unit. But the fact that Altec holds a lot of inventory really delayed the impact to our customers of this issue. We are facing it. But the fact that we carry extra inventory and we have the engineers on staff really help mitigate this crisis with Altec's customers.
Well, that's really awesome. Let's talk a little bit more about the reshoring or nearshoring or onshoring, whatever people want to call it. Are you seeing some of that? There's a lot of talk about it, and I've heard about it in pockets. What are you seeing out there, not just maybe at Altec for sure, but also just through the other, manufacturers that you talk to through SMA and everywhere else?
Yeah, I hear about it all the time. A lot of companies are moving from, Asia to Mexico. Some of them are moving back to the United States. Some of them are just in the evaluation stage. We're getting a lot of quoting activity because they want to know, what is it going to cost me to bring that assembly back from China or Taiwan to the United States? And so we're doing all of that work and trying to help the customers make those decisions.
Do you think that all these inquiries and reviews, do you anticipate that they're going to be successful? And there's a lot of people hoping that they are. Do you have a view on that?
I'm positive about it. I think that we will see some success in that area. A couple of years ago, we started getting work from Mexico. A couple of our customers moved the line from Mexico to Torrington. And so it's natural to think that it's going to continue, and there's even more reason for it to continue now.
Because this all started really pre-pandemic. That was
pre-pandemic.
And I think that's another piece that I think is really interesting to really point out. I think some people feel like, oh, well, everyone thinks everything's going to change from the pandemic. And, a lot of people believe that. But things tend to not change as much as we think in the time. But from what I've seen, I think you're echoing this, is a lot of these trends were already happening unrelated to the pandemic. Maybe that's pushing it a little bit faster in some areas. But reshoring is not something that just started in 2020.
That's true. It has been a slow-moving thing, and we've benefited from that trend. And I think we'll definitely see more of it. I think that there's a lot of growth opportunity for our industry in the United States and in Connecticut.
Oh, that's great news. Yeah. Let's talk a little about the SMA. I mean, Smaller Manufacturers Association, really based in Waterbury, and really grew up in Waterbury. And you've had some other names. I think at one point was the Waterbury's Manufacturers Association at one time or something. But it's a really great group. And I mean, you and I have talked about it offline. I have an opportunity to get engaged with it. I think it's one of Connecticut's great strengths, is all these great groups we have. And I wonder if you might just share with the audience, kind of your experience with the SMA in particular, what the value you've got, why you've been so engaged in it, and why someone should want to be engaged.
Sure. So I was involved in the SMTA and some other groups, and I was looking around for something more local to our Torrington facility. Mm-hmm. And so something came across my desk one day about the SMA, the Smaller Manufacturers of Connecticut. And I said, hey, I got to look into this. So I gave Cindy Zoldi a call. She was the executive director at the time, and she was just so energetic and positive, and invited me to a meeting. And then I joined and started attending the meetings, and then she and the others invited me to join the board of directors. So it was a very dynamic group, very open, wanting to bring in women in the manufacturing industry, and it's been fantastic working with them. I really love hearing the stories about other small manufacturers and how they're solving problems, and just collaborating and learning how they're attracting new hires and what they're doing to train. And it's been a wonderful experience. And I also have to say that I've been involved with the Chamber of Commerce in the Northwest Connecticut as well. They have a manufacturing coalition. And by participating on that, I was able to meet people from the Oliver Wolcott Technical School, the Northwestern Connecticut Community College. And by working together, we actually developed a course in soldering that was held at the college. And that happened for a few years. A supervisor at Altec helped develop the curriculum. He taught the class, and one of our engineers participated in that as well. And so we were able to get some new hires from that experience. And then we developed our own soldering class internally. So I think joining these groups, whether it's chambers of commerce, smaller manufacturers association, and others, really helps you come out of your shell and find out what are the best practices. What are the other manufacturing companies doing to solve problems? Maybe I can borrow an idea from them. Maybe I have some experiences that I can offer. So I think it just really helps the entire community and the entire state succeed in manufacturing by working together.
I completely agree. And I think, when people hear about like the smaller manufacturers association of Connecticut, I mean, there are companies in the SMA that are quite small, right? I mean, single digit employees, but there's also, companies that I think other people wouldn't, in the global sense of enterprise compared to a United Technologies, sure, they're small, but, Altec and others who are members of the SMA have hundreds of employees, right? And so there's really a nice kind of mix that I think is really interesting. And one of the things that's for me so fascinating or really so helpful about being in these business groups in particular is that really small businesses, like the ones, I started my own company, I was one person and two and three and so on, and now, a couple hundred, but you kind of, there's some ways people think and some passion that happens at those smaller levels that as you get bigger, right, you just have a different view of it. And being in a room with them and hearing what they're doing can give me or maybe give you some great new ideas and vice versa. And that like dynamism of sort of building off each other's energy, I think is so infectious and helpful to growing the businesses.
Yeah, I found that to be the case. And people have suppliers that maybe you can benefit from too. So you're not only sharing experience, but all the other good things that go along with running a business.
Absolutely. You touched on a little bit of workforce a little bit earlier, and I just want to kind of circle back to that. It's a hot topic. It's been hot in manufacturing. I think it kind of calmed down a little bit in the heat of the pandemic, but now that we're coming out, we're right back talking about workforce. So just, really would love to hear your view on what you're seeing from workforce, both from Altec specifically, also what you're seeing at SMA, and also just kind of in your part of Connecticut and what you guys are doing to sort of tackle the challenges of finding great people.
That's a great question. So we're having a really big challenge right now that started to occur during the pandemic. We took advantage of the PPP loan so that we didn't have to lay anyone off, but we did have some attrition during the pandemic, people who were frightened or they had fragile people at home they needed to take care of. So for a variety of reasons, we did lose some of our employees. And now we're having a hard time hiring people back again, and all of the other manufacturing companies and many other types of industry are struggling with the same thing because people left the workforce, they decided they were comfortable being home or found other opportunities. So I'm working with the Next Generation Partnership that's being run by Kathy Awad at the Northwest Regional Workforce Investment Board. And there are some other corporate leaders like Molly Kellogg, who's been on your program, and Evan Burns at Sites Corporation. And we're working together to kind of figure out how to attract more people into the manufacturing industry, how to let parents know that it's not this dirty place anymore, that it's actually a clean environment. And there are so many different types of jobs. Almost any personality type you have, you can find a niche in manufacturing, whether it be working in marketing, creating promotional materials, or soldering on the line. So many different opportunities. And so we're going to be doing a job fair. I think it's September 12th. And we're excited about that. And then, of course, the Smaller Manufacturers Association has alliances with the trade schools. And we provide awards to the students, and we're constantly interacting with them. We have a program where people can get grants for school. So I think that relationship with the schools and with the association helps identify resources, human resources for our manufacturing members.
How do you find, I mean, when you think about getting involved with some of these groups or looking at different ways of engaging with the community colleges, how hard is that? How easy is it? I feel like people think about it and get sort of scared that it's too unwieldy. How's it going to work? What are we going to do with those people? How do you think about that? And what's been your experience getting engaged?
Well, I didn't really know what to expect when I first started, but I've learned that it's actually really easy because the people who are working in the schools, they care about their students. They want to provide their students with opportunities. Not everybody can afford to go to college, and manufacturers would be happy to have people right out of high school. Altec trains, a lot of companies train, and there are also programs like MASC and Waterbury that provide training. And there's lots of ways to learn how to work in manufacturing. That's the easy part. It's showing people that it can be a very interesting and financially rewarding career as well. So that's the challenge, that we've just got to get the word out that it's a good place to work.
Get people to see the new manufacturing, not
Yes.
what they think was from whatever years ago.
Yep.
And
There are opportunities to grow. You get good benefits. You get a full-time schedule, not just a part-time schedule like you would at a Dunkin' Donuts or a Walmart. There's lots of good reasons to try manufacturing.
And you get to make really cool products that do some really cool things.
Yes, save lives.
Yeah, that's really, really rewarding. What do you see kind of in the future of Altec going forward? Or do you feel like the product line's going to remain the same? Are you guys changing? What's kind of the future of Altec?
That's a really insightful question. So we're a contract manufacturer, and we build products for our customers. But one of our engineers also designed an interesting product in order to solve a labor issue in our factory. So as I said before, we're constantly trying to find ways to take waste out of the process. And we were doing some testing on some wires. And this engineer created a box that would automatically or automate some of that testing process. And so we're exploring whether or not we can create that product in the marketplace. We're in the exploratory phase right now. So while we're a contract manufacturer, if things go right, we may start developing and selling one of our own products. So we would also be an OEM or an original equipment manufacturer as well.
Wow.
And that will help us diversify our business.
100%. Plus it's a totally different ballgame when you're making your own product as opposed to beholden to other people's products for any number of different reasons, right? I mean, it is great to help other people engineer, but if the product they're making isn't keeping up with market trends, you're kind of at their mercy. But to have your own product, Sabrina, that's pretty exciting.
Yeah, it is exciting. I have to credit our engineer, Andy Zaharik, for coming up with that idea. And hopefully we can market it and he can see that work that he did solving problems for other companies other than Altec.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
I just want to dip back to workforce. I know we're running out of time, but I just had a couple of things I was just thinking about that I didn't ask before, which is, one thing I wonder if you see, manufacturing is obviously different in a lot of ways than other businesses that went to a lot more of this work at home schedule because you can't build a printed circuit board remotely.
Right.
You can't, those are obviously challenges. But do you see the pandemic and the way kind of people's relationship to work seems to have changed a little bit? Do you see any changes to the way you guys think about how you're staffing or how the workforce works in terms of what you guys do?
Well, we kind of lived it. So when we realized what was happening with the pandemic in March of 2020, we decided to have all of the office employees who could work from home do so. And so we bought the technology we needed. We invested in Microsoft Teams technology, and we learned how to have meetings on that platform. And still today, 2 of our teams are working 100% from home, and other teams are rotating in and out of the office. And what that does is it takes off the pressure for the people who do have to physically be in the building because there are less people in the space to be spreading the virus. We can spread out the lunchroom, we could spread out the break rooms, and so people are, not only the people who are home, but the people who are in the facility are safer.
Do you think that's going to continue kind of more long-term to have more people kind of working part-time or full-time remote?
I think that there are certain benefits from people working from home. So, for example, there's more space in the factory to do production. if you're not taking up space with desks. And people working from home don't have to deal with the commute. And if they have a childcare issue, they can, juggle. They can take care of two birds with one stone. So I don't know that we'll ever go back to 100% everyone being in the office. Maybe a hybrid approach where, we do have some meetings in the office, or we do have people putting in some face time in the office so that they can, keep abreast of what's happening in the facility. And so that will help them do their jobs. But, we communicate with people in the factory every day using technology.
Yep.
And it's been phenomenal.
That's awesome. Do you guys think about any kind of creative ways to help attract new talent, to the business, either to help them see that it's not the dark, dirty, dingy days of yesteryear in manufacturing, or once you have people in, do you guys do stuff to try and kind of amp up the retention? Like, what are kind of some of the lessons you've learned through your journey trying to do that?
Well, I've participated in job fairs at the technical schools and the high schools. There was a fair at the middle school, actually, that I participated in, and they incorporated science, technology, engineering, arts, and math, the STEAM Carnival. Yeah. And so I would not only bring examples of our printed circuit boards, but also kind of a board game that showed how to put electronics together. And just to get students interested, I think you have to get people interested at a younger age so that when you say, what do you want to be when you grow up, they know that there are these jobs in manufacturing that they could be if they wanted to. So it's really raising awareness at the youngest age possible.
Yeah, I'm super big fan of that. And I mean, we're going to actually have on the CEO of the Connecticut Science Center, because I think, for me, how I got into IT and technology was actually like through science and science museums and, like kind of being really interested in realizing that like these things don't just cars and planes and computers don't happen by themselves. Like somebody
poof out of thin air.
They don't poof out of thin air. Somebody had to design that and make that, and you can be a part of that. And I think seeing it, making it seem real at an early age allows you to sort of dream. And we will go back to kind of looping all the way back to how we started, which was, this whole thing, how we ended up here today was because someone gave your dad a crystal radio kit for him to kind of play around with, right? Yes. Which is sort of one of those things that's really cool. So listen, as we're wrapping up, one thing I just did want to ask you about, and maybe this has something to do with globalization, but also the future, is like, a lot of times I'm talking to manufacturers now, there's a big kind of thinking around climate and climate change and being responsible stewards of the environment, which I know was one of the manufacturing strikes, I think, right? I mean, a lot of people, especially in the Waterbury area, remember the smells and the Naugatuck River not being, friendly for swimming, among other things. And a lot of that's really changed. And I hear a lot of conversations now in manufacturing plants talking about sustainability, whether it's solar or otherwise, carbon neutral footprints and all that. And I just wonder, what your thinking is around that. And is that something that's kind of on your radar? Yeah,
so I've been doing a lot of thinking about that lately. And instead of panicking, because I was starting to panic about climate change, I mean, my daughter's in the Pacific Northwest, and that's where she's dealing with the wildfires out there. So I decided to start doing some research about it. And I learned that manufacturers are responsible for 31% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions. And the steel and the concrete industries represent 27% of that number.
Wow.
And so I'm reading a book called The Case for Climate Capitalism by Ted Rand. And in that book, he talks about the Breakthrough Energy Collaborative with Bill and Melinda Gates and Jack Ma and these other very wealthy, well-connected people who are making investments in green technologies. One of the companies that they're investing in actually decarbonizes concrete. And the way that works is they inject recyclable CO2 during the mixing process, and that creates a mineral, calcium carbonate, which makes the concrete harder, which means you can use less cement. Cement manufacturing is such an energy-intensive process that it represents 7% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions. So if you can reduce the amount of cement in concrete, you're essentially decarbonizing it.
A lot of the world uses concrete as a
Yes.
primary building material.
My house is made out of concrete.
Well, all of our sidewalks, but if you ever go to like the Caribbean or even down in Florida or those Gulf Coast, I mean, tons and tons of concrete homes. Yeah.
Yeah, and then the other thing I learned about was a company called Dandelion, and they found an innovative way to bring geothermal heating and cooling to everyday people. You can have a geothermal system at your home. So they developed a new way of drilling and a new way of processing that thermal energy so that you can heat and cool your home without burning fossil fuels. And so learning about this and reading about this helped me to see all of the innovation that's happening in the world to reduce carbon emissions. And so I went from being really fearful to very hopeful. And so I think that there's enough smart people and innovation out there that we can make the changes that we need to make to save the planet, really.
Wow, I love ending on that like super positive note, but I have to ask you another question. I think that, what's super interesting is, you read about, and you mentioned Jack Ma, you mentioned Bill and Melinda Gates, I think a lot of us look at people like that and think two things. A, that's like a whole different sort of like stratosphere. And number two, they live a different lifestyle. Maybe that's part of this. Number one, when you read about this stuff, how do you think about what you do either as a personally day-to-day Sabrina or as Sabrina Beck, Vice President of Altek Electronics, do to help move the ball forward on that?
Oh, I think about that all the time. So crazy, but my husband and I have, really cut back the amount of meat that we eat. Because meat is a big generator, cows and pigs, and just farming is a big generator of greenhouse gas emissions. So we've cut back on the amount of meat we eat. I drive a hybrid vehicle. We have solar energy at our house, and I'm beginning to think about ways that our company can also reduce our emissions. We recycle. And we try to be a responsible company, but I think that we're just starting. There's a lot of opportunity there.
Yeah, that's a great conversation because I think there's a lot of people in manufacturing space in particular who are thinking about this, but sometimes it seems hard to know where to take the first. I mean, if you want to call recycling and all that, which I agree, the first step, I think a lot of people kind of gotten through some of those steps. But then to your point, it's like, well, then what? Where do I go? How do you
reduce the cost of energy and the how do you prevent from the burning of the fossil fuels in order to create energy? And the technology is just so interesting and innovative, and there are going to be all sorts of choices for companies to reduce their carbon footprint going forward.
Something I was just thinking about right now too is like thinking about shipping and how can we get more on each shipment, or can we have to ship less somehow so that we can reduce the amount of travel that creates a lot of greenhouse gases.
They did a study in France recently that showed that rail travel significantly reduces greenhouse gas emissions compared to airline travel. And so more of the French citizens are doing more of that rail travel. And I know that Governor Lamont is making investments in rail, and I think President Biden is interested in that as well. So I think that's one potential solution, is by beefing up the rail again, and but I know that there's going to be a lot of innovation, things that we can't even imagine today.
Yeah, listen, I mean, so much has happened. I remember, I just remember thinking about talking to my great grandmother, who I had the pleasure of getting to know. She didn't pass away till I was in my mid-teenager years, and just like talking about her kind of coming to this country in the early 20th century. And I mean, the computer was a thing by the time that, she passed away. And it was hard to imagine how I would see that much change. But when I really think about how much has happened, there's just so much change. And so I'm just really happy that you're hopeful for the future. That's really great.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to be hopeful for.
Well, listen, Sabrina, I really appreciate this conversation, to be continued for sure. Are you ready for some rapid fire round of questions?
Sure.
All right, here we go. Red Sox or Yankees?
Red Sox.
Thank you. Starbucks or Dunkin'?
I don't drink a lot of coffee, but I do like Dunkin' Donuts refreshers. You can't get them right now. Supply chain issues.
Supply chain issues. There you go. Staycation or exotic destination?
Oh, exotic destination.
And I mean, hopefully for someone that makes printed circuit boards, this isn't sort of a sacrilegious question, but iPhone or Android?
iPhone.
Ah, there we go. Sports car or SUV?
I drive an SUV.
If you could do anything other than be the vice president of Altek Electronics and you had to do something else, what would you do?
I would work for a company that is addressing the climate issue.
I'm very
I
passionate
would
about
help
climate.
do something involving reducing carbon emissions.
Oh, look at that. What's your favorite business book, if you have one?
So I don't have a favorite business book. Smarter, Better, Faster was one of the books that I really loved. But the one I'm reading right now, I have to say, is just giving me so much hope that the case for climate, capitalism.
Yeah, climate capitalism. Love it. What's something that you learned early in your career, early in your life that you think helped propel you to all the great success that you've had?
That you have to get outside your comfort zone. You know, if you just want to stay inside your little bubble where you're very comfortable, you're not going to grow, you're not going to learn, it's going to limit your potential. So doing things like this today that are totally outside your comfort zone, you got to do it.
I agree. We're got to keep growing. What's something, Sabrina, that you learned later in life or later in your career that if you went back and told young Sabrina, and if she'd listened to you, would make a real positive impact on her?
Let's see. I think that younger Sabrina would have studied more.
She should have studied more.
I would have studied more. Yeah.
What were you were you partying? What were you doing?
No, I wasn't a partier. But I would read for pleasure instead of reading for development. And there are so many interesting things to read about that I think I would have, instead of reading about, science fiction, I could have been reading about real science.
There you go. Always be learning. Sabrina, I really, really appreciate having you on today. Your views are really great. I look forward to having you on again.
Thank you so much.
Made in America with Ari Santiago is brought to you by IT Direct, a CompassMSP company.
As always, thank you so much for tuning in and spending some time with me today. My goal is to help build a community where we can learn and grow together. Your input, feedback, and engagement is critical to making that happen. Please do comment, like, and subscribe so more and more people can hear what we're doing and join our community of growth and success. Thanks so much for tuning in. Talk to you again soon.